Welcome to Around and Aside, a diplomatic journey. ഇരുപത്തിരണ്ട് 23 നവംബർ മാസത്തിൽ നടന്ന G20 സമ്മിറ്റിനെ പറ്റിയുള്ള ഒരു അവലോകനമാണ് ഇന്നത്തെ പരിപാടിയിൽ. 2023 ഇന്ത്യ G20 ഒരു പുതിയ തലത്തിലേക്ക് എത്തിച്ചിരുന്നു. സാധാരണ പരിപാടികളല്ലാതെ ഇന്ത്യയെ ലോകത്തിനെ പ്രൊജക്റ്റ് ചെയ്യുവാനും അതുപോലെ മറ്റു രാജ്യങ്ങൾക്ക് ഇന്ത്യ കാണുവാനും ഒക്കെയുള്ള അവസരം നമ്മൾ നൽകി. അത് G20 ലിമിറ്റഡ് ആയിരുന്നുമില്ല. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ആഫ്രിക്കൻ യൂണിയനെ ഒരു ഫുൾ മെമ്പറായി അംഗീകരിച്ചു. ഗ്ലോബൽ സൗത്തിന് വളരെയധികം പ്രാധാന്യം നൽകിയിരുന്നു. അവിടെ എല്ലാ രാജ്യങ്ങളും റെപ്രസെൻ്റ് ചെയ്യപ്പെട്ടു. ചൈന മാത്രമാണ് ഹെഡ് ഓഫ് സ്റ്റേറ്റ് ലെവലിൽ വരാതിരുന്നത്. അത് ഗ്ലോബൽ സൗത്തിൻ്റെ നേതൃത്വത്തിനു വേണ്ടിയുള്ള അവരുടെ ആഗ്രഹം കൊണ്ടായിരിക്കണം. അത് പ്രസിഡൻറ്റ് ഷീ അത് സമ്മതിച്ചില്ല. പക്ഷേ ഇത്തവണ അമേരിക്കൻ പ്രസിഡൻറ്റ്, ചൈനീസ് പ്രസിഡൻറ്റ്, റഷ്യൻ പ്രസിഡൻറ്റ് ഇവരാരും ഈ സമ്മേളനത്തിൽ പങ്കെടുത്തില്ല. അതിന് പ്രധാന കാരണം സൗത്ത് ആഫ്രിക്കയുടെ ചില സ്റ്റേറ്റ്മെൻറ്റ്സും സൗത്ത് ആഫ്രിക്കയോട് ഇപ്പോൾ ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു അഭിപ്രായ വ്യത്യാസമൊക്കെ കാരണം കൊണ്ടായിരിക്കാം. പക്ഷേ ഇന്ത്യ അതിന് വളരെയധികം പ്രാധാന്യം നൽകി. പ്രധാനമന്ത്രി നരേന്ദ്രമോദി ഒരു പുതിയ അജണ്ട തന്നെ G20 വേണ്ടി സമർപ്പിക്കുകയുണ്ടായി. ഇതെല്ലാം ചർച്ച ചെയ്യാനായി നമ്മോടൊപ്പം അംബാസഡർ TS തിരുമൂർത്തിയുണ്ട്. അദ്ദേഹം യുണൈറ്റഡ് നേഷൻസ് ന്യൂയോർക്കിൽ ഇന്ത്യയുടെ പെർമനൻറ്റ് റെപ്രസെൻറ്റേറ്റീവ് ആയിരുന്നു. അതുപോലെ ലോകത്തിൻ്റെ പല രാജ്യങ്ങളിലും അദ്ദേഹം പ്രവർത്തിച്ചിട്ടുമുണ്ട്. വെൽക്കം തിരു.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me in your program.
Today we are talking about G20. I read your very interesting article in the Hindustan Times, which is a good assessment. But I was telling my viewers that it seems that G20 has been downgraded in a certain way. The agenda did not come up to the expectations. Attendance was poor because 3 major countries did not participate. But India participated very actively, and Prime Minister Modi made a specific proposal for the agenda of the future. So what do you think of our participation in spite of the fact that there has been a degradation of the G20?
There have been 2 important developments over the last few years in G20. And because G20 started dealing with a lot more issues than what they started off with, partly because that UN Security Council, the WTO, they were being emasculated. Even the climate change, UN Convention on Climate Change, the meetings, that has started withering away and was not producing results. So all of this came into G20, and G20 started dealing with it. And it was a good thing that in the last few years, G20 actually managed to get consensus on many of the issues. So therefore, there was a G20 which was now looking at a lot more than what they started off earlier. The second is, as you had also mentioned, that it started dealing with global South issues much more. G20 was always a bit of a rich man's club. And one of the things they lacked was really the inclusivity. And it was an issue. And India played a very important role during its presidency to get in the African Union and make the G20 more representative. They also, for the first time, held what is called the Voice of the Global South Summit, which they had a meeting of the Global South to get their issues in. And now 4 consecutive Global South presidencies have ensured that their priorities have got reflected. And particularly now in South Africa, when the African priorities got reflected, because this is the first one on African soil. So I think the US boycott and the rejection of all the priorities of South Africa, and they even called the South African theme as anti-American. I think this was casting a big shadow over the current summit. And it was really India, along with the other middle powers, which propped up South Africa's presidency, and we managed to salvage as consensus, which was a fairly strong consensus. But the problem is now going forward, and this is what you have correctly said, that there will be a downgrading of the G20 in some ways.
Summit in India managed to
Yeah.
get a consensus on the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yes,
That was perhaps one of the biggest achievements, apart from the other things that we did. And therefore, it
definitely.
assumed a lot of importance. All sides,
And
though they may
yeah,
have criticized it later and did not lead to to peace in that region, but there was this understanding that what we failed to do in Bali, the previous summit, India was able to accomplish. So that was
yes,
one of the achievements. So though it was not a traditional agenda item of G20, that assumed great prominence, and India's
exactly.
own role was highlighted. And then
Yes,
the global south idea developed in a big way. In fact, both Russia and China also wanted to be leaders of the global south. That was the
that's true.
trend. But since then, the Americans have already rejected BRICS. That was another development. And therefore, they seem to be developing some kind of allergy towards regional organizations because they feel that they are ganging up against the United States. But why Russia and China did not come is a mystery, isn't it?
Russia not coming was probably related to the fact that South Africa is a member of the International Criminal Court. And therefore, since they have an arrest warrant against President Putin, I think it was probably not feasible for him, or he felt it prudent not to travel to South Africa.
Right.
So he had also skipped, I think, the earlier meeting there. But China coming was not coming was a bit of a surprise, because China clearly is a very strong supporter of not just South Africa, but also G20. And this is a time for them to really come in. So my assessment is probably that the Chinese felt that in case there is no consensus, maybe this was not the place for President Xi to be there if there is no consensus. But fortunately, there was a consensus and it was pushed through. And so maybe that was merely optics probably prevented them from coming. But that said, as you correctly said, that they have got consensus on issues. India's proposals, some of them were important proposals, particularly on the health front and others, and they were very well received. And some of them actually got recorded in the joint statement, in the summit statement.
So G20 is in search of a new identity and a new agenda. And I'm afraid that the Americans will try to lead it in a direction which is
Very true.
favorable to the West. And they have said they will not invite South Africa. That is another surprising
That's of
statement.
course.
So
I
G20
think,
is at crossroads. But what is your assessment that what way it can move forward?
sir, I think, with the US taking over the presidency for 2026, both the issues which I had flagged, I think they are both in the danger of vanishing. And US said very clearly they want only core issues, as you have said. They basically, for them, the core issues means removing the regulatory burdens, unlocking energy supply chains, and new tech and innovation. These are so they're going to come back and restrict it. And this is a pity, because US may be technically right in trying to restrict it to a core issue, but institutions also evolve. And therefore, for example, Security Council, they are looking at the Renaissance Dam built by Ethiopia as a security issue. So institutions evolved, definitions evolved. So it will be a pity if it goes back to a more restricted scope of work. Second is the loss of this global South agenda. That is very real. And I don't think any G20 member, when they are going forward in the US presidency, will be in any position to resist the US juggernaut, if I may use the word, to restrict it to a core set of areas. And therefore, I have frivolously, of course, suggested in my article that the heads of state, since the US has said that it will be held in Miami in President Trump's golf club, the meeting, they should start playing golf, or they should start practicing their
And it
golf.
may become a rich man's club again.
Exactly. It will become a rich man's club
Because
again.
most of the developing countries' heads of state don't play golf. So,
Exactly.
so that will be a disadvantage. The United States seem to become more and more cautious about regional organizations, SEO, then BRICS, all these, they say these are anti-American groupings.
Yeah.
And that's to also slight deterioration of relations with the United States may also made them very alert to India's leadership of the global south. So that may be a reason. But did the American delegation raise these issues what America considers important at this Johannesburg meeting?
They did not participate in the meeting at all.
No
They
one was there.
boycotted it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So therefore, when they boycotted the meeting, the only thing they said is that we will send the CDA, which is Charge d'Affaires, the number 2 in the mission, to come and take the gavel from you when
Yes,
you
and they did not
conclude.
give it to him.
That they didn't give it, and he said this is an insult to a head of state, for an official to come and take it, and they gave it in the Foreign Office, and this riled up, I think, the United States even more, and they, of course, as you know, so they have accused them of white genocide and things like that. So I think there's a lot of bad blood, and even as you correctly mentioned, even a couple of days ago, the Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, actually said that South Africa operated on a operated with
Anti-American agenda.
spite, division, and a radical agenda. That is what he said. So I think there is a lot of bad blood. But going forward, it doesn't augur well for G20. What will happen is that if the American presidency does not produce the results it should, then people may just decide to wait out the Trump presidency. And after all,
The whole world is waiting for it anyway. Not only
Yeah,
in the
that's true.
G20 context. For the future
Yes.
of the world, people are waiting. So
Exactly, sir. And so I think 1 year, of course, is a long time in both in American politics and in G20, because November you're going to have the elections in the United States. So then this is a December,
midterm elections.
midterm elections. I think it's going to be interesting how after the midterm elections, how they are going to look at the G20 summit.
Well, it depends on whether the Republican Party retains the majority, because at the moment
Yes.
they have majority in both the houses.
Yeah.
So there is some expectation that maybe in the Congress they may
Correct.
not have the majority. So that will make a little change because the president will
Yeah,
be
a
much
bit of
more
a change,
cautious.
because right now there is so much of MAGA agenda, which the Republican base, that there is they are not relenting at all on any other issue. So we'll have to see when the summit comes how it changes, if at all.
But will the Global South then take a non-aligned kind of stature? Is that likely to happen? Because now that the non-aligned movement is not so active.
Sir, actually, you're right. In the sense, one of the things which I had mentioned in my article is that I think it's important for middle powers to come and form some sort of a, and try to put their views forward in the G20. And
No, that
it
is
is
the
not
fear
an
that the
an-
Americans have. That this is being
Exactly,
hijacked
exactly.
by bringing 50 African states
Correct.
into it. It lost the balance.
Some pressure should come from the middle powers, and it should not be an anti-US agenda, definitely not. And they can navigate with the US agenda, but somewhere I think they should start asserting themselves as a group. And I have a feeling that there may be others who will come in. It's not that everyone, even the developed countries, are not necessarily in sync with the agenda in G20 of the US, which they have. So I think somewhere there should be a coalition of countries coming and saying, yes, we have a very constructive agenda, which we would like to include as well. So protecting the G20 is now not in the hands of the developed countries. It is in the hand of the middle powers.
Yes.
And how much can they resist? It seems unlikely they will resist too much. But at the same time, I don't think they need to cave in. After all, Americans have also reacted when people have pushed back. Sometimes they have actually given in. Of course, China is going to be important in this context because Americans, after all, they put so much of pressure on the United States that they had to come and negotiate with them and salvage whatever they wanted, before they conclude a trade deal with China. So China is going to be extremely important in the context of the pushback, that the agenda should not be hijacked.
And therefore their absence in South Africa is all the more important. They did not want to create a kind of anti-American situation there. So they probably kept out of it. Because South Africans, they thought.
They didn't want to be seen that way. And also, if they didn't have a consensus with the presence of President Xi, I have a feeling, they didn't want that to happen. But fortunately, there was a consensus. But these are probably what they feared, and they stayed out.
But then the Global South could emerge, as I said earlier, as a kind of new non-aligned movement if these people keep out of it. That is also a danger, isn't it, from their perspective?
So right now, I have always advocated very strongly that India should take a far more proactive interest in the conflicts around the world, not only Ukraine, not only Gaza and the Middle East, but also in other conflicts. We should start playing a bigger role. We have the policy of multi-alignment. We are, in very good relations with many parts of the world. And we now have an opportunity to start once again looking at regaining that leadership role which you have always played with the global south. I think this is the right moment to do that. And it is also the right moment for us to assert our our strategic autonomy, our independence of decision making. It is not an anti-US or an anti-Russia or an anti-China thing. But I think the global south looks up to India to take up this role. And so it is important for us that we don't get marginalized or stay on the sidelines. We have been broadly very slightly quiet about many of the issues going on. I think it's especially after Operation Sindoor, when we have realized that we need the rest of the world for our agenda. I think it's important for India also to reach out to their agenda and start playing a proactive role.
But you know very well that we shy away from mediation. The word itself is somewhat
Yes.
unacceptable to us. And that is what really brought a difference of opinion between us and President Trump, because he
Correct.
claims that he mediated between India and Pakistan. And that's a word which we do not like. And
Yeah.
therefore, in the past also, whenever we are urged to intervene in international conflicts, we have shied away from them. Because
True,
since we
sir.
have this issue of mediation, our going and mediating between Ukraine and Russia would have looked a little bit out of place.
So
And
what
so
I
India
have
has
in
been
mind,
rather reluctant to jump into international conflicts so far, except that peacekeeping, etc.
absolutely, sir. What I have really in mind is the role we played in 1951, 52, 53 in the Korean War. India did not mediate, but we took a very active position, a very proactive position in the Korean War, to the
No, but
extent
that is
that,
because we are members of a particular group
yes, Security Council, but
which
when
was
the
strengthened,
armistice
which was
came,
empowered by the Security Council.
correct, sir. But when the armistice agreement came, India was made the chair of the Neutral
Yes.
Nations Repatriation Committee. So there was a profile which we had. I'm talking about the profile. I'm not suggesting that we go and solve the Ukraine problem or get in, but I think it's important for us to keep the engagement very closely. And I think that is where, I think India was missing an opportunity. And I think tactically also it was important for India to keep that engagement. We didn't have to get into a situation where we have a 25% levy on, because we are getting oil from Russia. So our greater engagement with the Ukraine war and others could have helped, people to look at India slightly differently and optically differently. So that
Well,
is what I was meaning, not really an intervention or, shuttle diplomacy. That's not what I had in mind, sir.
no, you have been permanent representative in New York at the UN, and you know that we are active.
Yes.
And nothing happens there without consultation with India. This is a fact. In fact, next only to the 5 permanent members, we seem to have a position of that kind. But we don't seem to invite these kind of opportunities because of our own angularities also. Our policy sometimes, when it comes to terrorism, for example, we are absolutely against any kind of acceptance of terrorism, for instance. We don't accept the theory of freedom fighters. That theory we do not accept. But at the same time, we have supported freedom fighters elsewhere. So that is the reason why probably we don't go frontally on these issues. But next only to you remember there was an assessment by some Canadian newspaper some time ago saying that India is the most effective country in the UN after the 5 permanent members. And that remains a reality. But then somehow we have this reluctance to get into kind of mediation situation, or even getting into, except for expressing our opinions, as we said. So we are a bit reluctant. But I agree that it should be more visible. We know it that we are very active at the UN, but maybe the world does not know outside that we play such a silent role but effective role there.
Yes, sir. There are two reasons, two areas. One is that initially we focused on our economy, and we believe that if we don't get involved in geopolitical issues, then we can grow from fifth largest to fourth largest into third largest. But that template is gone. That template is broken. We realize that geopolitics is now driving geoeconomics and geotechnology. So that is one realization we need to have. The other thing is Operation Sindoor has proved that, if we want the international community to get engaged with our issues on terrorism, we need to get engaged with their issues more actively. So I think these are the two changes which has happened in the recent past, which needs, which is something which I think we have definitely been more now in the last few months. I find we are extremely proactive. So I think that is what we should continue. And as you correctly said, sir, to take the leadership of Global South, and I think that's going to be a very important aspect of our being proactive at the global stage.
Well, we have to wait for the Miami summit of G20. It's a bit of a difficult situation. We do not really know what role the United States will take. But we have some time to have consultations on this. Thank you very much, Thiru.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. ഈയിടെ ജോഹാനസ്ബർഗിൽ നടന്ന G20 സമ്മിറ്റിനെ പറ്റിയുള്ള ഈ അവലോകനം ഇവിടെ സമാപിക്കുകയാണ്. അടുത്തയാഴ്ച നമുക്ക് വീണ്ടും കാണാം മറ്റൊരു വിഷയവുമായി. നമസ്കാരം.